Good morning. Today is Wednesday, May 13th. 13th, yes. May, yes. Okay, good. I think I'm right. You'll correct me, obviously, if I'm not. Today what we're going to be going over for ecology are the biomes. Now, the biomes are pretty straightforward. I don't think any of this is going to be brand new, and quite honestly, most of it is going to be kind of anecdotal. There's not a lot of stuff that you guys actually need to know about the biomes other than understanding what they are. And then everything else about them will come into play later when we start going over the human impact side of things. When we start talking about exactly how people are affecting these biomes, that's when it really gets important. So, here we are. A biome is defined very simply as being an area of land that all has the same climate. Now, these two things, the stuff that makes up a climate, can be mixed and matched a number of ways, and every variation will create, like you can see all the way around here, a different type of biome. Largely, though, we're going to focus on just a few. But first, let's talk about the most important abiotic factors that we find in any environment. Those two factors are going to be the temperature and the precipitation, how warm or cold it is, and the amount of water and the type of water. So that's going to be a really important distinction. We want to know how much, and in some cases, the type of precipitation makes even bigger difference than the amount. So when you combine these two things, these two abiotic factors, remember, abiotic, you put that A in front of a word, it means not. So it's a not biotic. You should know what that means. Now, we can take these two things and we can kind of put them together into a very simple graph. And what this does is months are across the bottom, starting in January, ending in December. Rainfall is on the left side, temperature is on the right side. The rainfall is a bar graph, so all those blue bars shows you when and where their precipitation is showing up. So you can see that for this particular place, we're seeing a lot of precipitation in April and May, and, generally speaking, less precipitation over the course of the rest of the year. We see that the temperature there, the red line, gets to the highest, which, mind you, going up near that 25 degrees, that's reasonably warm. That's solid 80s. And that is in the June, July, and August months. So it's actually very similar to where we live. But this is that temperature precipitation graph. Now, I can already hear Caleb in the background saying, but Matthews, there's also wind patterns. There are current patterns. There are all these other things that affect like the climate of an area. And yes, you are correct. Although most of those are left for earth science, and there are entire sections of land that are less affected by it than other ones. But yes, there is more than just these two, which is why it's a science, which is why the meteorologist cannot accurately predict the weather even a couple days from now because it's a very complex system. We're only looking at these two variables. Now, the way that you combine them gives you all these different biomes that we have. So if you take a look at this one, the temperature is up the Y, the precipitation is across the X, and you can see that if the temperature is high and the precipitation is high, we have the tropical rainforest. We can see that if the precipitation is towards the middle and the temperature is towards the middle, we have a temperate deciduous forest. And you can vary and adjust it like that. A taiga is very similar to a deciduous forest, but it's a little bit colder on average. Meanwhile, a savanna, a grassland, can be very similar to a deciduous forest, but both of them tend to be a little bit warmer and grasslands tend to be a little bit lower on precipitation. So this is just a visual way for you guys to see how these different conditions can kind of weave together in order to create our biomes. Now, if we break Earth up into six very simple biomes, there are dozens of biomes depending on who you talk to. The world map looks something like this: tundra, taiga, grassland in yellow, and then desert, temperate forest, and tropical rainforest in the dark green. We're going to talk about these six. These are the basic biomes. Now, if you take a look at Earth, now this one has been color enhanced to kind of show a little bit more, but just by looking at this, you can make out all sorts of different biomes, different ecosystems that exist just based on the color of the landmass that you're seeing. The deserts and grasslands in the browns and your reds. We've got areas with a lot of forests in your darker greens. Like, you can see just an idea of how much there is. So let's talk about each one, and we're going to go through these super quick because, once again, for the most part, you really don't need to know the specifics. So, rainforests, very small percentage of Earth. It's just in these areas colored blue, basically right along the equator or just a little bit south of it. High temperature, high precipitation year round, rampant, unbelievable growth. I've got some stories about the rainforest I'll share with you guys when we get a little bit further ahead. Um, Very productive land, very important for a lot of species of animals. Okay. Desert. Now, deserts, notice a desert does not have a requirement based around temperature, only precipitation. Low precipitation, less than 25 centimeters per year. So, if you imagine, if you could go out to where this picture was taken, you could put down a little magical glass tube, right? And your magical glass tube would collect water that fell on it, and it would hold it in there perfectly. None of it would evaporate out, none of it could be drank by animals. It would just sit there. And then you came back for that 1 year later, there would be less than 9 inches of water in total over 12 months that fell on that area. That's what a desert is. And interestingly, a lot of people think of this image, the cacti and stuff like that, when you think desert. It's worth noting this is a desert too. This is Antarctica. And Antarctica may be covered in snow, but it doesn't mean it gets a lot of it. It gets very little. It's just that it's generally speaking so cold that none of it melts. And so it just builds up and builds up and builds up. The grasslands. Now, grasslands have temperatures similar to us, but they usually have low precipitation, but it's kind of weird in that their precipitation happens in like a cyclical event. So you see the giraffe standing here in the grassland, right? That's what most people think of. But if you look at that picture of the zebra running through the water, that's like the same area, it's just a different month. And in that month, they get so much rain that it causes this massive, crazy flooding in those areas. And then for the rest of the year, they get almost none. Now, the taiga can also be called the boreal forest. And basically, if you think of what you imagine when you think of Canada, and it's not a Tim Hortons, then this is what it probably looks like in your mind. Pine trees covered in snow, some of the local species, caribou on the right. That's a moose, that's a bull moose, a male bull moose. I wanted to give you guys a picture to give you kind of a scale representation. Because if you look at that, that moose is massive, ridiculously huge animals. Most Americans don't realize how big a moose is. We think of a moose as being, a big deer. It's not a big deer. It's like three big deer all stacked together. They are really, really huge. They are also unbelievably violent and dangerous if it's the mating season because the males get super territorial. Then there is, of course, what would be the most important one for us? The temperate forest, whether it is deciduous or coniferous. This is where New York State is. So this would normally be the biome that we would focus on the most because the regents would ask you about New York State's biome. It's the New York State Regents. But without the test this year, we're just going to kind of accept that this is the scenario. We have the leafy version on the left and the needly version on the right. Deciduous on the left, meaning that it loses its leaves every year. Coniferous on the right, meaning that it drops cones every year. We get both of them here in New York State. Now, it's worth noting there's also, 70% of the planet covered in water. And the areas that are covered in ocean get determined by a couple of different factors. Obviously, a region of land no longer works because it's so vast. Instead, what we do is we look at, first of all, how far is it from the shore? You have your intertidal zone where the tide drops and rises and it spends half the day underwater and half the day out of the water. You have your continental shelf that can go out somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 miles. Then you get into your deeper ocean. You have your pelagic, which is generally the area that's like, a lot of water, hundreds and hundreds of feet, about 600 feet on average. And then you get down into your photic and aphotic zones based on the amount of light. So there's a lot of differences here. And you don't really need to worry about most of these. These are beyond our scope or reference, being upstate New York. But understand that different things will live in each area because just like every biome, the animals that live there have to be adapted to live there. Then we've got our estuaries. Now, this one I wanted to include because this is the single most productive biome on Earth by square mile. Now, because unfortunately estuaries are so small, they don't actually count for a whole lot, not like globally. But they are super, super important. This is an area where freshwater meets saltwater. And we found out through a variety of mistakes that these areas are very important to a lot of different animals. So, do you guys remember all this year? I've been saying that there's one basic theme that shows up again and again and again throughout the entirety of biology, and that is when humans want to help nature, what happens? So the estuaries are a great example of humans wanting to help nature. Estuaries tend to happen where like rivers flow out and then hit into the ocean. And people took a look at that, and generally speaking, in those locations, you end up with what we call a river delta. River deltas, if this loads, are what you see in all of these different images, right? So it's where this river kind of branches out into like dozens of tiny little pathways. Well, people saw this and they said, oh no, the river, she wants to meet the ocean. But look, she's having difficulty. Let's help. And so we brought in great big machinery and we dredged. We just dug right through the middle of these things. We just took great big scoops and we just ripped up the earth. We ripped up the mud, the plants, the sand, anything that was between that river and that ocean. We opened up the delta so that the river could meet the ocean like it wanted to. Take a wild guess if that was a good or a bad thing. Yeah, so after opening this up, then we find out all of a sudden fishing populations start to tank. Where we used to catch hundreds of thousands of fish, now we're catching dozens of fish. And people are like, why? Why? Well, this is why. These estuaries are breeding centers for fish. See, it turns out that when you have saltwater and freshwater, the adult saltwater fish can't go in freshwater. The adult freshwater fish can't go in saltwater. But baby fish, baby fish are way more adaptable, and many species of them can survive in salty water or salty and freshwater, or freshwater and salty and freshwater. So baby fish would migrate to these estuaries in massive, unbelievable numbers. We're talking about a school of fish that has 30 million fish in one school. And this is where they would grow. This was their pre K. This was their elementary school. They stayed here until they were big enough that they could go back out into the world and have a chance at survival. Meanwhile, most of their predators couldn't follow them here. When we dug a channel right through this, we screwed up that entire balance. Because, once again, that theme, whenever people have taken a look at nature and decided we're going to help nature, we screw it up. Nature on this planet has effectively, this isn't the right term for it, but effectively evolved a balance and how it works over billions of years. To think that we can show up in the last couple thousand and we could then make the difference is just, it's just hubris. It's just people wanting to be more important than we actually are. All right, let's finish this up. I'm running low on disk space. And then there's the deep ocean. Now, normally I would show you guys a video about this, like a full hour-long video, because this is such a cool and bizarre environment. So far down that there's no light, so there's no plants, there's no autotrophs. What is the base of the food chain down here does not exist. And so everything in the deep ocean has needed to evolve down completely different rules, different conditions. It is crazy, but it's awesome. And I encourage everybody to take a look online. You can find dozens of videos about the animals and the organisms that live down here and the conditions that they've evolved under. Most of them are from the BBC. They do great work on it. The Blue Planet series, Blue Planet 1 or Blue Planet 2. Check it out. It is super, super cool. Now, a quick introduction for the project. The project that I'm going to have you guys do is literally going to be to make a little biome poster. Now, I don't care if you do this by copying and pasting pictures and images and stuff onto it. I don't care if you do it by hand like this one. I want you to show me 3 of the dominant forms of plant life, so find out whichever biome you pick, what lives there. Don't just say, well, it's a rainforest, so here's a tree. No, no, no. I want to know what kind of tree. Give me the species name of that tree. Show at least 3 animals that live in the biome. Once again, be specific. Color, which shouldn't be much of a problem, the name of the biome, and I would like to know the temperature and precipitation that you find in that biome. Once again, I don't care if you guys go online and you are just copying and pasting pictures onto a sheet with a background of that biome, whatever. That will work. I just want you guys to do a little bit of research for whichever biome it is that interests you. And if you want to check out a biome that we did not go over but you see listed, do it. Absolutely fine with that. So, hopefully that'll help. Hopefully everybody has a good grasp of the biomes. Tomorrow on Thursday, I'll just be here for questions, so there won't be a video. Friday, I will introduce part 2 of this project, and we'll move on. Later.